She was cold, alone, and desperate, whispering, "Don't throw me out, I'll warm your bed." But he chose to warm her heart first, showing her a kindness she never expected. Tonight on Cowboy Chronicles, we share a story of survival, trust, and unexpected love. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment below. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Let's get started. The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes the world feel distant and unwelcoming. He had been riding for hours, the dust of the trail still clinging to his boots and the chill of the wind biting at his face. Out here, the land had a way of testing you, stripping away pretenses until all that was left was raw determination. And yet he hadn't expected to find her there, huddled by the side of the old wooden barn, shivering under a threadbare blanket, her eyes wide and pleading, searching for some kind of mercy from the world that had clearly been harsh to her. She looked like she had walked out of a forgotten story, a figure caught between despair and hope, and when she spoke, her voice trembled like the wind through the pines. "Don't throw me out, I'll warm your bed," she pleaded, and he froze for a moment, taken aback by the honesty and vulnerability in her words. There was no deceit, no pretense, just a raw, desperate offer of survival. But he knew deep down that he couldn't just offer her warmth for the night. He had to give her something that mattered more, something that could heal rather than merely soothe. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. He could feel the weight of her fear, the kind that comes from being unseen and unwanted, left to fend for oneself in a world that rarely shows mercy. Yet he also saw something else, a spark that refused to die, a light that somehow made the night feel a little less oppressive. And in that spark, he recognized the chance to do more than just offer a bed. He could offer hope. He could offer a reason to believe in kindness, in connection, in the possibility that someone could truly care. He dismounted slowly, letting his boots hit the ground with deliberate calm, a way of showing her that he was not a threat, that his presence carried no judgment. His hands, calloused from years of labor under the sun, moved in a way that conveyed steadiness, reassurance. "Sit with me," he said gently, pointing to the edge of the barn where the shadows seemed a little less threatening. She hesitated, then shuffled closer, as if the warmth she sought was not just physical but also emotional, a recognition that someone had seen her struggle and chosen to stay, chosen to witness her existence without turning away. She sat, the night air seemed to hold its breath. He started a small fire with wood he had collected earlier, the flames flickering like tiny guardians against the cold. The warmth it radiated was modest, but enough to draw a shiver from her body as it reached her fingers. She watched him work silently, her eyes flickering with gratitude that she didn't fully know how to express. Words felt inadequate here. Survival had taught her that words often failed, that actions spoke louder than anything spoken. And his actions spoke volumes, showing patience, attention, and a kind of care that she hadn't expected. There was a moment, a suspended second in time, when he looked at her and saw not a stranger, not a burden, but a soul in need of something he could give. And then he made his choice, quietly, without fanfare or hesitation. He would warm her heart first, even before offering the simple comfort of a bed. He could see that her life had hardened her, that the cold of the world had made her wary of trust, of affection. But he knew that warmth could be more than heat. It could be reassurance, safety, and a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. He reached for his coat and draped it over her shoulders, letting the fabric fall around her like a protective shield. Her eyes met his, wide and brimming with questions, but he didn't answer with words. Instead, he simply smiled, a small, grounding gesture that said more than any sentence ever could. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she relaxed. The tremor in her hands diminished, the tension in her shoulders eased. She was learning, in that quiet way that only moments like this teach, that warmth was not just physical. It was the courage to show up for someone, to care without expecting repayment. The wind howled outside, but inside that little circle of firelight, there was a fragile sense of peace. He spoke softly about the land, about the quiet routines that governed his days and nights, stories that carried no judgment but carried meaning. She listened, letting herself be carried by the cadence of his voice, the gentle rhythm that contrasted so sharply with the chaos and unpredictability of her own life. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a world where trust could exist, where someone could see her for who she was rather than what she lacked. Hours passed, though time felt suspended. The fire burned down to embers, and still she stayed, wrapped in his coat and the unspoken promise that she was safe here. He didn't ask her to explain her situation, didn't press her to justify her presence. He merely shared the moment with her, letting the connection form naturally, fragile as it was, yet stronger than anything she had known in months. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, her heart began to thaw, just as he had intended, proving that true warmth comes from understanding, compassion, and the willingness to put someone else before your own convenience. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was quiet, deliberate, and profoundly human. She realized that the bed she had been seeking wasn't the most important thing after all. What she needed, what had been missing in her life, was someone who chose to care for her heart first, someone who saw the value of her being rather than the utility of her warmth. And in that realization, her defenses began to crumble, revealing vulnerability that hadn't been seen for years. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, the kind of awakening that comes only when you are allowed to be truly seen. He noticed the change, subtle but undeniable, the easing of tension in her posture, the glimmer of trust in her eyes. And he knew, without needing to speak it aloud, that the choice he had made was the right one. In a world that often rewards selfishness, he had chosen empathy. In a life that often teaches cynicism, he had chosen hope. And for her, that choice was life-changing. She wasn't just getting through the night. She was witnessing what it meant to be cared for genuinely, to be offered not just survival, but restoration. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she felt a sense of renewal that she hadn't felt in years. The chill of the night had lessened, replaced by the warmth that only comes from human connection. And he, standing beside her, watched quietly as the world awakened around them, knowing that their story had only just begun, that the act of choosing to warm someone's heart first was the seed from which everything else could grow. The following days unfolded with a rhythm both quiet and profound, a rhythm that slowly stitched the fractures of Leela's heart back together. She awoke each morning to the smell of fresh coffee and the soft crackle of firewood, the world outside still crisp and unyielding, but inside the cabin, life had a gentle steadiness she had never known. He never asked her to prove her worth, never questioned her presence. Instead, he shared his routines, his simple labors, and in doing so, offered her the rare gift of belonging. The fire that had first brought her comfort became a symbol, a reminder that warmth could exist in the smallest gestures. Leela discovered her own strength in those days. She chopped wood alongside him, her hands raw at first, but gradually calloused, the work grounding her in the moment. She learned to stoke the fire just right, to tend the stove, to prepare meals that nourished both body and spirit. With each passing hour, the distance between them shrank, not in words but in understanding. He never took, never demanded. He only guided, corrected gently, and encouraged quietly. For Leela, who had spent years bracing for rejection, this was a revelation. Human kindness, she realized, could be deliberate and consistent, and it could heal in ways survival alone never could. Evenings were spent by the hearth, where shadows danced across rough wooden walls, and conversations unfolded like delicate threads weaving two lives together. She told him fragments of her story, of towns where doors had closed to her, of nights spent under the stars hoping for warmth that never came, of fleeting kindnesses that had been swallowed by misfortune. He listened, never interrupting, never judging, and his silence was its own affirmation. It said, "I see you, you matter, and you belong." In those moments, Leela felt the unfamiliar but intoxicating sensation of trust, and slowly, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. One evening, the wind outside was fierce, rattling the cabin like an unwelcome guest, yet inside, there was a different kind of storm brewing, a quiet tension, the stirrings of unspoken emotions. Leela hesitated before speaking, her gaze fixed on the fire, then finally whispered, "I came here thinking all I needed was a bed to keep me warm, but I realize now it wasn't warmth I was seeking. It was something more." Her voice faltered, vulnerability threading each word. "I didn't understand that maybe I needed someone to see me, to care for me without expecting anything in return." He watched her, reading the depth behind her confession, the pain softened by the emergence of hope. He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his, the rough texture of his palms grounding them both. "You've given me more than you know," he said softly. "When you came here, I could see the weight you carried, but you also brought something else, a light I didn't know I needed. You've warmed more than just your own heart." There was a sincerity in his voice that left no room for doubt. For Leela, whose life had been punctuated by rejection, it was a revelation to be told that she mattered for who she was, not for what she could offer. The walls around her heart softened further, making room for something she had not allowed herself to feel in years: belonging. Days turned into weeks, and the cabin became more than shelter, it became home. They shared small routines, simple joys, gathering water from the nearby stream, tending the tiny garden he had begun planting, laughing quietly when a mishap occurred with the stove. Life's simplicity had never felt so profound. In the quiet moments, their hands would brush while preparing meals, or their shoulders would touch while gathering firewood, and each touch spoke of connection far deeper than words. Leela began to understand that the warmth she had once offered as a bargain was no longer necessary. It had been replaced by genuine companionship, shared care, and mutual respect. One morning, as dawn broke over frost-laden fields, Leela awoke to find him already outside, tending to the horses. She joined him, her movements slower but steady, and they worked side by side in silence, comfortable in the shared rhythm of labor. When she finally spoke, it was not of need but of recognition. "I never imagined a life like this," she said softly. "One where I feel safe, where I feel seen, and yet here I am because of you." He smiled, the sun catching in his eyes, and for a moment, there was a quiet intimacy in that simple acknowledgement, a deep understanding that went beyond words or gestures. Spring edged into summer, and with the changing season came the realization that their bond had grown into something enduring, something neither had anticipated, but both had quietly welcomed. They laughed together over shared mistakes, celebrated small victories in tending the land, and found joy in each other's presence. Leela had come seeking warmth, a temporary respite from the cold, but what she found was a steadfast companion who had chosen to nurture her heart, to value her spirit, and to build a life alongside her without pretense. Each day brought proof that true connection was not transactional, but a gift freely given and gratefully received. One evening, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset, Leela turned to him, her voice unsteady with emotion yet strong with conviction. "I came here thinking I only needed a bed for the night, but now I know it's never been about a bed. It's about being seen, being understood, and being cared for, and I can't imagine going back to a life without this." He reached for her, his hands steady and reassuring, capturing not just her fingers but her trust, her gratitude, her newfound sense of belonging. "You don't have to imagine that," he said, "because you're home, and you'll stay that way as long as you want." In that moment, the barriers of the past, the cold nights, the closed doors, the rejection felt distant, almost unreal. Leela realized that the greatest warmth doesn't come from a bed or even fire alone. It comes from human connection, the courage to show up for another soul, and the willingness to nurture a bond without conditions. And in choosing to care for her heart before accepting her offer of warmth, he had given her more than survival, he had given her life again. Not the kind of life defined by mere existence, but a life full of trust, hope, and quiet joy. The seasons continued to shift, the snow giving way to blooms, the land turning green and fertile, yet inside the cabin, life maintained the gentle consistency that had become their sanctuary. Leela no longer felt the gnawing fear of abandonment. She no longer braced herself for rejection. Each day, she discovered new depths in herself, encouraged and supported by the man who had chosen to see her beyond the immediate need. And slowly, the bond between them matured into a love that was steady, enduring, and profound, one built not on desperation, but on choice, respect, and shared understanding. One crisp morning, as light filtered softly through the cabin windows, they sat together by the fire, hands intertwined, hearts aligned. Leela finally spoke the words she had carried for so long, her voice steady and sure. "I came seeking warmth, but I found so much more. I found safety, trust, and a heart that cares. And now I can say I am home, because you've made me feel it." He smiled, pulling her close, the firelight reflecting in their eyes, and in that embrace, They both understood the truth. Love, when offered first to the heart, could transform not only a night, but a lifetime. And so the cabin by the edge of the woods remained a sanctuary, a place where two souls had found each other, healed together, and learned the deepest lesson of all, that warmth given to the heart is eternal, and that choosing to care first is the bravest act of all.